Yes, this is Business AM, the last part of our conversation this morning. Thank you for being with us all the way from 7 a.m. this morning. Now, Startups Safaricom's Spark Fund, which was birthed in 2014, has allocated 540 million shillings to fund local tech startups in the country. This is part of its initiative to invest in startups that align with Safaricom's purpose, as well as support high-potential tech ventures in Kenya. Now, the Spark Fund seeks to grow strategically aligned tech-enabled startups for either a Safaricom partnership or acquisition. Now, startups will receive support in the form of investments, business development support, and technical assistance. Now, according to Safaricom, the fund will support startups through a combination of business development support, and technical assistance, leveraging on Safaricom's unique capabilities, assets, and market positioning. Now, the fund will invest up to 54 million and possibly larger amounts on a case-by-case basis into startups which offer local solutions to their communities. Now, the Spark Fund is especially keen to invest in late seed and early growth stage ventures in education, healthcare, and agriculture. However, the opportunity is open to startups on other categories that complement Safaricom's offering. All right, now joining us this morning to understand deeper into Safaricom's Spark Fund, we are joined by Eugene Ngumi. He's the head of I&A and at SRM East Africa. Eugene, good morning.
Morning, how are you today?
We're good, happy to have you around. Can you let us know more about the Spark Fund?
So the Spark Fund has actually been around for a few years, and Safaricom has used it as a vehicle to invest in startups that have shown they have definite market potential. So very similar to the conditions that they outlined when they announced this new round of funding is that they invest in startups that have shown they have a viable business model, that have some form of mobile application, and that are already operating in Kenya. So it's been around for a while, but this announcement is a significant expansion of the fund.
Pretty much. Now, what other attributes does a startup need, therefore, to fully qualify for this Spark Fund?
So you need to have a viable business. I think that's the most important attribute. So I think the distinction here is that this is not a fund for businesses or entrepreneurs with an idea. This is a fund for startups that have gone through the first couple of phases of growth, done some initial investment fundraising, and are now at the point where they can scale. And that's where this fund comes in. So you need to have a viable business model, you need to have existing customers, and you need to have an existing digital platform already in operation to qualify for this fund.
Pretty much every time we see a fund, that we say that there are specific challenges that this fund is trying to address in that specific area. From what you're sitting this morning, Eugene, what would you say are the specific challenges of tech startups that the Spark Fund is really seeking to address?
So the specific challenge this fund is looking to address is taking businesses and startups to scale. That's the real challenge that they're looking to address. So it's taking businesses that have proven they can survive and then giving them the investment they need to scale. A lot of startups tend to have trouble going into C series and beyond rounds of funding where they can get funds that enable them to scale to a mass market. And this is where that fund is seeking to step in. It's also important to note that this fund is aimed at tech startups with mobile applications. So Safaricom is being very clear that it's looking for startups that have synergies with its own business rather than looking at the whole tech sector.
Pretty much. Now, looking at the fund's eligibility, I mean, startups interested in the funding need to have a Kenyan presence as well as a commercially viable business. Now, Eugene, from a policy perspective, how does one test commercial viability if in reality what you want to help this business do is scale up? Isn't scaling up going to give you commercial viability in the first place?
Not quite. I think commercial viability can be proven by the fact that you've been in operation for a couple of years. Actually, most startups, there was a Kenya National Bureau of Statistics survey a few years ago that showed most startups fail within their first 2 years. So if you can show that you've been in business for 2+ years, if you can show that you are generating cash flows and revenues from an existing business and that you have an existing customer base, and that customer base, that demographic can be expanded, then I think that's a way of showing you have a viable business.
Yes. Eugene, I'm not going to leave you from that because I want to also go to this criteria for the Spark Fund, which also requires the startups to have a refined, working, mobile-based product or service with an active user base. I mean, looking at the challenges that we're talking about that this fund is really trying to address, how feasible is this in the Kenyan environment?
I think this is quite feasible. If you look at the statistics, you'll see that most Kenyans access internet services via mobile phones, especially smartphones. And here's where Safaricom is being commercially attuned, in that by requiring the startups to have a mobile-based business model in some part, they're ensuring that it has synergy with their own business model. In that, these businesses will either be able to drive customers to use more data and Safaricom services, or they will be businesses that Safaricom can later invest in or buy themselves and integrate into their own operations. So I think that's what this is aimed at. And in terms of viability, it's a requirement that isn't that wouldn't lock out too many people, because to be viable in this market, particularly if you're an internet-based platform, you have to be on mobile.
Yes. Eugene, from where you seated this morning, can you paint for me the picture of what the tech space will look like for a developing economy? Because that's exactly what it is that we're addressing this morning.
So the tech space at the moment in Kenya is quite interesting because we have quite high internet penetration, particularly through mobile phones and mobile data. So that in many ways is what drives internet use and online business. But aligned to that is the fact that the business model has to fit our context. You can't just import something that's worked somewhere else. So you've seen it with various platforms that have had to tweak their product offerings and come up with products that are viable for Kenyans, that Kenyans can afford, particularly if you're a mass market offering, and that can grow over time. What Safaricom is providing is coming into a space where I said there are a lot of problems in the tech sector, where there's not a lot of local or domestic funding for startups, particularly in the tech space, particularly at this phase where they're looking to scale, where they've shown viability and now they're looking to go mass market. The availability of credit or investment to domestic startups is quite scarce. So Safaricom is stepping into a space here that does need this funding.
Interesting that we should be talking about that, because if we look at what the data that we have on our screen today is that if you look at how Safaricom has been really getting or investing in service revenue, it has been increasing towards, which therefore takes to my next question, that interested startups or eligible startups should be either have a late seed or early growth stage tech-driven ventures. Now, the Spark Fund also urges applicants to protect their ideas or prototypes before submitting their applications. And there's also that point that you're actually therefore partnering up with Safaricom. So what is your take on general policies around tech startups in the country?
So I think the tech scene is one that, and startups is one that's succeeded in many ways despite of the environment. As I said, it can be quite difficult to raise funding. The statistics are not good for startups, something like 65% fail within their first 2 years. And of course, I think what Safaricom is doing by urging companies to protect their IP is important. It's something that investors need to, startups and entrepreneurs need to do. And of course, they've come into criticism in the past for not encouraging entrepreneurs who come to them with ideas to do so. And by protecting IP, by making sure they're Kenyan, you sort of create a space where local startups can scale. And that's something that, it's very niche in this space in terms of by having that mobile tech requirement, but it's also something that potentially government could invest in to improve the startup space that people like the NSE or the Capital Markets Authority could come up with rules and regulations to promote more domestic private sector funding into the tech startup space, particularly for startups, as you mentioned, at that C stage, funding stage, where they've already proven they can run as a business. Now they need money to scale.
Pretty much, Eugene. Just as we clear this conversation this morning, they're saying that they are going to be addressed on a case-by-case basis. So for any tech startup company listening to this morning, what do you think they need to do so that when we look at that data for these tech startup companies, they are the first one to be addressed with this 54 million capital?
Well, first off, obviously read the requirements, carefully and make sure you fit those requirements, and also make sure you have a viable mobile platform, because that's definitely Safaricom something they're looking for to give funding, and finally is to have a business model that works. So be very clear in terms of what market you're trying to address, what market problem you're trying to address, and how that can scale. So it's I would say it's like any other pitch to investors. It's just that at least this time Safaricom have put their requirements out. So read those very carefully and make sure you fit those requirements, and you should have your foot in the door.
Yes, Eugene, as we clear, therefore, there's this bigger concentration on mobile. Do you think that our tech space has to include the mobile, just going by the number of penetration, of the mobile technology in the country?
Yes, if you are looking for some sort of mass market penetration, you have to be mobile. If you're targeting demographics like young people or people in rural areas, you have to be mobile. Now, obviously, that doesn't apply to every tech startup or every tech venture in the country. But I think if you're looking for mass market appeal, then you have to be mobile. So the vast majority of tech business models you will see will have some sort of mobile component.
Pretty much. Eugene, it was a pleasure speaking to you this morning, sir.
Thank you.
All right, and that marks the end of a Business AM today. My name is Simba Elijah Jansky.